we're okay to roll? Okay, we will roll. Excellent. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Juho Lipponen. I'm coordinator of the Clean Energy Ministerial CCUS initiative, and my great pleasure to welcome you all to this morning's event on CCUS, a key lever to decarbonize the global cement sector. Great thanks to Thomas, Claude, and everybody at GCCA for the partnership. We are today doing the first of actually a series of 4 events at this same pavilion, same hour, 4 consecutive days. And we've designed these together with the GCCA crowd to cover a lot of interesting areas around CCUS and cement. So today is our overall event on strategy. Tomorrow morning we're going to be talking about transport and storage infrastructure. On Tuesday morning we will take a deeper dive into policy mechanisms and incentives, and then on Wednesday morning we finish this series with the theme of the Carbon Management Challenge, which people may have heard about and which will be launched on the or spoken in a high-level meeting on Tuesday. So that's our series of events here in collaboration with GCCA, and the logos bottom of the slide here. I mean, many thanks to all these organizations who will be speaking at all these events. So wonderful, thanks so much. And today's panel and program is here. I'll hand over in a second to Thomas, who will give the welcome on behalf of GCCA, and also give us a brief introduction on from GCCA's perspective on decarbonization and the role of CCUS. After that, we'll follow with 3 company presentations from Heidelberg Materials, Holcim, and Cemex on their visions of decarbonization and the role that CCUS plays in their thinking. So these are 3 elevator pitches in that region of 4 to 5 minutes each, and after that, the 3 company presentations, we will have a panel, and the panelists companies will be joined by representatives from the Clean Energy Ministerial, from UNIDO, and from the Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, and we'll have a discussion on these topics with them. So again, GCCA colleagues, thanks for collaborating on this series, and over to you, Thomas.
So thanks very much, Joe. And I think actually the thank you goes really both ways. I'll come back to that in 1 second in my discussion. As you said, I mean, it has been a really productive collaboration at what we have been doing, and we signed the partnership back in Pittsburgh, right? A few days before the COP of Sharm el-Sheikh. And I have to say that this is one of the partnerships that really brought fruits, and that really came on is creating the famous snowball effect of discussion between industry, your organization, and the governmental organization, and we are really trying to get the best of the different bodies and organization. In 1 year, I mean, we have delivered 3 webinars, right? I mean, 2 webinars. One is pending on public policies, on infrastructure, and we have the one on financing pending, if I'm not mistaken, right? So that's really important for us. We met also in Goa with the same ministerial, where we started to talk, and we went out of Goa saying CCUS is becoming something different. And I think we are managing, thanks to you, I think we contributed a little bit to elevate really the role of carbon capture and the perception of carbon capture throughout these discussions. So I would like to introduce why it's important for us as cement industry, and I think most of you have seen that by now. So that's our roadmap with the objective of 2050 net zero. In doing this, we have identified the different technologies or the different levels that are needed in order to get to net zero. And you see in purple the importance of carbon capture. So it's 36% of the total volumes. By 2050, we need to have, depending on the scenario, between 1.2 to 1.5, 1.6 billion tons of carbon capture. And we need to have this development and deployment relatively quickly. We need to understand how we make it happen in the next decade. Well, the decade is almost midway now, so I mean it's not anymore a decade, and we have to be ready by the turn of the decade to really deploy the industry on the project. This is an extract from the Mission Possible partnership scenario that summarize different sectors, that was working with 7 sectors, and summarize how the different green technologies should be ramped up across the world. And you see here what is interesting, I think, is the little round with the multiple. So you have here green power, you have hydrogen, you have CO2 storage, and you have sustainable biomass. And you see how carbon capture needed this elevation. So, I come back to what I was saying earlier. The question is really, we had to change the discussion on the profile of CCUS because CCUS was not sufficiently addressed, right? And the challenge is to go 99 times. So it's really, it's almost from 0 to a radical deployment on a radical solution as one of the essential solutions to address the climate change. And I often say, for me, carbon capture, use and store is the brake pedal of the climate change. It's one of the few technologies that really will enable to get the things out of the system and to really remove the CO2 from the system. And you see the importance of this technology for cement. Cement is 21% of the future demand out of these different technologies. So I want to give you back the word now to engage on the panel. And thank you very much again for the collaboration.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. So next up on the program is indeed a series of 3 quick company visions. We have Winston Beck, who is Head of Government Affairs at Heidelberg Materials. We have Vicente Saizo, who is Vice President for Global Sustainability at Cemex. And we should have and will have Cedric Demeus, who is Vice President for Group Public Affairs at Holcim. Cedric is lost somewhere on the web, but he should be with us any moment. And here, really, the idea is that we hear 3 short and snappy company visions on decarbonization and the role of carbon capture in it. And maybe to start us off, Winston, you might go first, and then we follow with Vicente.
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks very much, Juho, for organization and GCCA for hosting. So I will briefly present Heidelberg Materials' sustainability strategy and how we develop CCUS. So a few maybe quick highlights. Heidelberg Materials, we are one of the global construction material companies present in over 50 countries. We actually have updated our sustainability strategy in May 2022, and we are now aiming to reduce our CO2 footprint by almost 50% by 2030, focusing on Scope 1 and Scope 2, which is another 30% improvement compared to 2020. And it is really one of the most ambitious targets in our industry, and it will get us to 400 kilos CO2 per ton cementitious material within the next 7 years. And of course, in the long term, as all in our industry and as also the GCCA roadmap, we are aiming to achieve a net zero status by 2050 at the latest. but we are quite convinced that in some regions, such as in Europe and Northern America, that will go even quicker. But in order to achieve these targets, it also means that we really need to reinvent ourselves as a company and the way we are operating, right? And we also really need to look at all different levers we have in order to achieve the targets. So we are looking at product optimization, meaning more supplementary cementitious material, alternative raw materials. We are looking in recycling. We are investing a lot in Europe and Northern America and in Australia in that area. So we really need to have a circular mindset in everything what we do. But as also Cedric, as also GCCA said, Thomas said, in order to get there, in order to get to net zero, we need carbon capture, storage, and utilization. And I think important for the cement sector and important for our strategy at Heidelberg Materials, we don't only need it to get to net zero, but we already need CCUS in order to achieve our own targets for 2030. And that is why we are working internally on the CCUS master plan. I mean, our roadmap is built bottom up, so we really have looked at all our 140 plus sites around the world, how we can decarbonize, and we have a major CCUS master plan internally. But so far we have published 9 CCUS projects, mainly in Europe and in the US. And we are aiming to put in operation the first CCS facility in cement by the end of 2024. That is our plant in Brevik in Norway, where we will capture 400,000 tons of CO2. That is 50% of the emissions. And then we hopefully can put in operation the first full-scale CCS plant in Edmonton in Canada in 2026. And that project is also going very well, and we are in discussions with all the governments in order to also create the right framework conditions and of course the support measures. And that is really, I think all of us are now working on the implementation. We are quite confident when it comes to the technical side, because all of the technologies we are looking at, mainly 3 different capture technologies, all of these technologies are quite mature already. We are also rather confident when it comes to the operational side. Of course, I think there's a lot still to learn and to experience when this first project is being launched. But we are quite confident that we have the expertise by now. I mean, we are looking at CCUS since 2005. Brevik has been developed since 2014. But where we are really still lacking the support is on the commercial side. So we really need to look at the funding. We need to look at the infrastructure, be it the CO2, be it the energy, and also be it to make it a business case. And maybe last, I think it's absolutely fantastic to be here at COP, because on Tuesday this week we have also started to work on the commercial side of CCS with the launch of Evo Zero. So Evo Zero is the first carbon captured net zero cement in the world, which we will be able to deliver as of 2025. The books are now open, and we will deliver it in 2 different ways. We have the carbon captured Evo Zero Brevik, which is the physical product, which will be transported out of Norway, and we have the carbon captured Evo Zero, which will be not a physical, but which will be virtual certificates with blockchain technology, but also captured at our plant in Norway. So thanks very much. Happy to answer any questions, and yes.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the intro. I would explain very briefly what at CEMEX what we are doing about CCUS, and how it links to our decarbonization strategy. First, I would make reference to the roadmap that Thomas showed on the GCCA, we have our own roadmap. And I would say that one significant difference with what Winston just mentioned in our roadmap is that by 2030 we have verified a target aligned with the 1.5 degree scenario, where we are not relying in CCUS at that point in time, and we are going to be pushing for CCUS after 2030. No? What we did internally in a bottom-up exercise is that we found that the proven or traditional levers in our industry are good enough for us to reach that ambitious 2030 target without really needing CCUS at that point in time. That doesn't mean that we are not going to pursue CCUS, but at least in our 2030 target we are not reflecting it. We think that the proven technologies will take us quite far in the decarbonization pathway. Almost 50% of our emissions will be reduced by 2030 by relying on those proven technologies, which is alternative fuels with high biomass content, decarbonated raw materials, reducing the clinker factor through the use of blended cements, the use of hydrogen in our combustion process to reduce specific heat consumption, etc. So we think that those proven technologies really can take us quite far, maybe almost 50% by 2030, and if we push them beyond 2030, maybe 60% or something like that, only on those technologies. We think it's very relevant for the industry to continue to push those levers, because those levers are feasible, are profitable, the investments have very good returns, and there's a business case for those. No? So we think that's what makes sense. Nevertheless, to reach all the way to carbon neutrality, we think that around 30 to 35% of the remaining equation will rely on CCUS in our whole roadmap. Certainly, it's a lever that will have to contribute to reach to that net zero. But since this technology is at an early stage of development for our industry, we think it will take time to mature and to develop the business case for that to happen, no? And that's why we think that will evolve a little bit later than what is already available for us to do immediately, no? When we focus on the CCUS lever as one of the key elements to reach carbon neutrality, we have, I would say, two types of tracks. One is where there are already some technologies that have a good degree of technology readiness level that are ready to be deployed. Perhaps those technologies, obviously at the very first stage, will have a level of cost that will have to evolve in the future. But for those technologies, what we are thinking for those technologies is their immediate use in some large-scale projects that definitely we are envisioning to do. We need to get ourselves involved as part of the industry in developing and pushing the scale-up of those technologies. We are looking at Europe and the US to deploy those large-scale projects, because that's where there is government support and government funding to help the business case of those projects to make them a reality. And in parallel, we think there will still be room for innovation in some disruptive CCUS technologies that could deliver some lower operational cost and maybe lower capex cost in the future. And we are also working in smaller scale pilot testing of those technologies with some startups. In CEMEX, we set up a venture business unit, CEMEX Ventures, where we are investing in some startups. And through these startups is that we are exploring some of these newer technologies with lower technological readiness level, but with a good promise of delivering CCUS at a lower cost, maybe in the future. No? So we think that's also important to also work on those more disruptive or more modular, smaller things that can be scaled up in the future. No? So we have these two tracks happening at the same time, and we think the business case for CCUS will take a little bit longer to develop than what we already have at hand with the proven technologies, and we're planning to be very active part of that. I think the leadership of the global companies in the CCUS will play a big role in helping that process move faster. What we are also finding out in each one of the projects, each one of the plants has to have a very different solution, custom made. That makes it complicated from the point of view of developing a project. It will not be a one project that then you can replicate easily in different locations. It really takes, you have to take the time for each plant to develop its own roadmap and its own different combination of solutions. We also think there's going to be a different mix of utilization and storage in this equation, depending on the location, depending on the ecosystem surrounding each facility. So this is really a game where we have to focus and do a deep dive in each one of our facilities and then decide what is the best roadmap for each one of them. No? We have a certain number of projects, like 7 locations in Europe and in the US where we are doing this deep dive, and the economics and the partnerships will help us define which ones will move faster in the roadmap of starting to get them to be implemented. Certainly, both in the US and in Europe, the grants are a big facilitator of providing a temporary business case to try to make them happen. And hopefully with the scaling up of those solutions and the learnings from all these partnerships that we are developing will help us to gradually create that business case that could be extended to other geographies. No? And I think that's in a nutshell what we're thinking about CCUS as an overall strategy. It's a relevant lever. A lot of CO2 mitigation can happen with existing levers. We really want to put an emphasis on that, because then the amount of CO2 that has to be captured and stored will be smaller, and the challenge will be easier to handle. No, so that's more or less how we are approaching it, and we'll see. It's very, let's say, tough competition that we are facing, and I think from that competition good things will happen, and things will move faster in our sector. No? Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Cédric Demeus from Holcim. Sorry for being late, the pleasures of COP. I'm not going to say anything massively different from my colleagues, although I haven't heard you, Winston, but I can guess what you said. In a nutshell, and leaving rapidly to leave more space for discussion, we're working on all levers. Those levers are the traditional levers you were referring to, including defossilizing our operations, including working on energy efficiency, and so on. Second pillar is to work on formulation. There are lots of opportunities to innovate in the formulation. What comes to mind is calcined clay. We've got the first full-scale plant that came in operations last year in France for calcined clay-based solution, which allows you to put on the market solutions that are already 50% CO2 reduced compared to the average. So that's a massive way forward. The other one is construction and demolition waste. I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The third lever, you also mentioned it, it's innovation. We collaborate with over 100 startups around the world on a range of different innovation, be it in the space of mineralization, be it in the space of storage, be in the space of innovative formulation and innovative chemistries. I can't help noticing that they are very present at COP. Many events were held with those innovative companies and startups with a noticeable presence over the last 2 days, which was interesting. And the fourth lever, of course, is CCUS. What I would like to say on CCUS is that CCUS is not a silver bullet. You mentioned it, the less we have to capture, the better we will be. CCUS is the last lever that you use at the end, but nonetheless an essential one to get to net zero. I think what is a characteristics of this deployment of CCUS in our sector, certainly at Holcim, but I can only suspect it's the same for all of us, is that each and every project is different. You might have a generic technology to capture, but the implementation, the execution and the operation will be vastly different from one project to the other. And they have one thing in common today, is that all of these projects need to develop an industrial value chain that does not exist. That does not exist. And each and every site where you have such a project, you need to develop this value chain, whether you use the CO2, where you store it, and so on and so forth. I certainly don't want to downplay CCUS. It's certainly part of the strategy. We have at Holcim what we call 11 flagship projects, which are at a very advanced level of maturity. 5 million tons of CO2, at least 5 million tons of CO2 by 2030, and put on the market 8 million tons of fully decarbonized cement by 2030. That's our North Star as far as CCUS is concerned. I mentioned construction demolition waste. That's the second lever that's in different formulations. We also see a massive opportunity in capturing construction demolition waste around the world, which is used at different stages of the cement production or the concrete production, which also provide an interesting potential there. We plan to capture 20 million tons of construction demolition materials by 2030, working on over 150 individual projects to accelerate that as much and as fast as we possibly can. So I'll leave that as a very quick overview and can go in more details in the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thanks to all the three company representatives for their views. Really interesting to hear the role of CCUS. Also interesting to hear how speeds might be different, how implementation is maybe going to take some different times, but however the carbon capture is an essential lever and it will play a role. So let's move on then to the panel in which we will be joined by Stig Svenningsen, who is Deputy Director General at the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy in Norway. Welcome, Stig. J.F. Gagné, who is head of the SEM Clean Energy Ministerial Secretariat. Oh, and Rana, you are there. Rana Ghoneim, who is Chief of Energy Transition at UNIDO. Thanks everybody for joining. And we know that Stig has a hard stop in, I think, 15 minutes from now at the latest. So Stig, you will just then leave when you need to leave. And but thanks for being us even with for a shorter time. And thanks everyone. Before we start the panel, I think one thing that I meant to say in the beginning and forgot is that it's really great that the cement industry and GCCA has come very, very strongly into the CCUS forum, and you really have upped the profile, because before the cement industry came, we had obviously equipment manufacturers who were talking a lot about carbon capture, and they would do because they sell equipment and solutions. We had industries that may help, that will need CCUS to decarbonize and can offer infrastructure and storage services, i.e. oil and gas They were of course present in the beginning, but cement sector really is the first one that has come out and said, hey, we need this technology, it's part of, we are going to be users of this technology. And that's actually a really helpful setup to start with, and that's why it's really particularly good to have the cement industry in this game so actively. But let's go to the panel for the next 20 minutes. And starting with you, Stig. Norwegian government, you have chosen to support the Norcem Heidelberg Materials Breivik cement project under your Longship program. Can you tell briefly what led to the decision to support the cement sector CCS project in Norway?
Thank you, Juho. CCS in Norway has never been about electricity or power generation, just to start there. Because we are close to 100% renewables. So for us, CCS has always been about decarbonizing industry. So many years ago, we did a survey of all the point sources of CO2 in Norway onshore, and the cement factory in Heidelberg cement factory was one of those point sources that stood out as a large source of CO2. There were others as well. After we have done this survey, we had an open call for interest to industry if they wanted to join a competition on being part of our CCS project. And Heidelberg was one of those companies who raised their hand, and we also had two other industries that put out their hands. So that is the short answer, that it was a combination of us going through all point sources and seeing what is relevant for Norway, and the industry stepping up, saying we are willing to join you in this work.
Thank you, Stig. Now we heard already from three companies that you're developing carbon capture, maybe at different speeds, also in different parts of the world, and Holcim and Heidelberg already mentioned like numbers of projects that you have in mind. Cemex you didn't necessarily, but you're also developing the earlier project that as you mentioned, Vicente. So could you all take a moment and reflect a little bit, pick a country in which you are developing a CCUS project, and talk a little bit about why you're doing it there and how the policy framework might be beneficial in that particular jurisdiction that allows you to move ahead with CCUS project. Maybe Cedric, you may start, and then move this way.
Look, I think where we are engaged in CCUS projects is where you have the most mature policy environment. You have fundamental pieces of it. The central one in our perspective is carbon pricing. Carbon pricing, a reasonable carbon price, is fundamental to build the necessary business case, because let's be honest, I don't think I've seen any project, even those that are shovel ready, where the business case is fully squared and closed. So if you don't have a carbon price, it becomes very complicated to build a business case. You also need a regulatory framework behind that gives you clarity on what you can do with the CO2 that you've captured. If you want to use, there's lots of demand for usage. In some parts of the world, the regulatory framework does not encourage you to use the carbon, but pushes you to store it. So it's a mix. I think
Yes. So absolutely. I think the incentives is a very important point. The other important point is, of course, the storage. So we need to have the availability of the storage, and we need to have, I think, also the public acceptance. So as I said, we looked at the map, and I think the area which is the most likely where CCS are being developed first is, of course, because of those reasons, in Europe and in the US. In Europe, our first project is around the North Sea, because the North Sea is where we do have the storage available. But I think Also important is really the transport side. So I mean, the shorter the distance is to the storage, the less complex, or if we have a pipeline available, for example, it becomes more cost efficient, and it also becomes a bit more straightforward to implement. So one example I could point out very quickly is our project in Bulgaria, for example. I think that's an exciting one because it's a full chain CCS project in Eastern Europe. It's actually directly located to the at the Black Sea, and we will develop a CO2 storage in a depleted gas field under it. So that is one of the few projects, I would say, which are a bit more advanced in the thinking, which are not located directly in the at the North Sea, or will transport it to the North Sea, because it's also very important that we develop storage somewhere else. It will have a pipeline of 30 to 40 kilometers, so that's comparatively relatively short, and that's actually. So it's a single source, a single sink project. There are a few chemical players around it, but this cluster is not yet developed. So the pipeline will really be developed for us. I think the capacity still needs to be decided. And we actually will be quite engaged in the transport development ourselves. So that is a new area for us, and we're really also learning a lot here. The regulator, we have the ETS from the EU side, we have the funding from the Innovation Fund, but we need to work a lot on the national regulations, because they are non-existent in Eastern Europe. The awareness for CCS is almost non-existent. So we actually took a group of 30 regulators from Bulgaria to Norway and to Netherlands to learn what is needed in order to, for example, certify a depleted gas field into a CO2 storage. But I can tell you it's a lot of work, and there's still a lot of work to be done on the regulatory side.
Thank you. Vicente.
Yeah, in order to complement and not to repeat some of the things that are obvious that have been mentioned by Winston and Cedric, as we were mentioning, the challenge of each project and each location and each country, that is what is really the part that it's in continuous evolution. We have let's say, leave this like a moving target, given that there's not complete clarity in the regulations at all the different levels, even at the national level. And I would say that obviously the storage location and the distance of transportation is a key factor in determining whether a project has a reasonable cost structure that can make it attractive from the business perspective. And that certainly is one of the key elements that determines where the location could be more attractive. That is happening to be elusive. Obviously, the plants in Europe that are located near the sea and that will have a quick access to be transported either to the Northern Sea, or now there's a few options that are starting to develop in the Mediterranean, come at hand first. But we also think that in the future of decarbonization of Europe, there has to be onshore storage at some point in time, without complete clarity on how that will evolve. One of the places where we have learned a lot about the challenges of an onshore inland location is Rudersdorf in Germany, where we have been working several years in trying to develop a project that solves all the different challenges, and it has not been easy. It has a combination of usage of the CO2 for sustainable aviation fuel, that could deal with part of the emissions, but the remaining emissions will need a storage that is a challenge because of the transportation. So we are finding that there are a lot of moving elements in the puzzle of putting together one project, and the level of maturity of regulation is still in a very infant stage, and it's I don't know. That's why we are keeping our options open, and we continue to come up with new ideas of new locations, and we know that along the way there will be developments that will
help us choose where is the place where we can do a quicker, faster implementation.
Very good. Thanks. Thanks all the three of you. I think you mentioned the key points: incentives, carbon price, or whatever else it could be. The regulations, the regulatory framework that needs to be there. Of course, the storage and transport infrastructure. All absolutely vital points. Rana, I wanted to come to you next. We've heard from Norway and three companies. I mean, all three companies have their home base in an OECD country. UNIDO works a lot with emerging economies. So, could you comment a little bit on how you see and how emerging economies might see the role of CCUS in heavy industry decarbonization in general?
Sure. I mean, absolutely, CCUS is part of the equation to get to net zero. But when we look at non-OECD economies, I think the most critical point is that we have different starting points. Be it in terms of access to technology, access to finance, or even policy settings. So this is something that we need to acknowledge as a starting point. Now, in terms of the challenges that we see, you talked about grant financing coming for these projects. This is absent in developing countries. So there is no grant funding coming for the support of R&D also in industry, or if, then it's very limited. The grants that we see in the EU or in the US are just totally absent there. So if we want to support this technology localization and development, this is just not there. The second point is also related to finance, is that finance is just not available, or if it's available, it's also quite expensive for companies in the global south. And at the present time, actually, very few donors or the green funds and so on are not really willing to support this technology development. And I see Stig here, and tech has a role to play there in terms of the UNFCCC discussions to really, is CCUS part of the equation or not? Because the risk here as well is, since we're talking about different starting points, is that in developing countries, there is no infrastructure, and that infrastructure needs to start developing today. So unless we also make sure that the funding is available to develop that infrastructure, it's a sort of a catch-22 situation where, you really need to advance on that. And then, absolutely policies, but, there are also some good examples, like about a year and a half ago, I was in India, and there was a whole talk about the absence of policies for licensing. A few months ago, I was there, and there was like great progress that happened. But so what we need there is actually more of this knowledge exchange among countries. What we need as well, we see it also, centers of excellence that are being established in India, in China as well. Here, I guess in the region, UAE and Saudi is certainly among the countries that are leading the way on development of CCS and CCUS. So how do we, make sure that countries that are already progressing accelerate, but how do we make sure that countries that are, 2 steps back turbocharge? That's not a word I usually use, but I think it makes very much sense here. And really jump on that train. So I think that's where I will end.
Great, thanks, Rana.
Can I add something to that, if I may?
Sure.
We tend to focus almost exclusively on the upstream side of the discussion. So the capex investment,
right,
which is a heavy capex investment. Perhaps we don't focus enough on the downstream. Who's going to buy the decarbonized cement? Where's the demand going from? So if it's challenging in environment like Europe or United States, where this demand is, evolving, but it still remains the exception rather than the rule, the demand in those countries is simply not there at all. And so you really need to tackle it from both ends.
Thank you, thanks, and we may come back to that very point shortly. And it was great, actually, that Winston, you mentioned your Evo Zero development already earlier. We'll have a question on that as well. JF, Clean Energy Ministerial, is a group of 30 governments that brings governments, but not only governments, also industry together to advance clean energy deployment in general, and to turbocharge it, or to use Rana's term. What can the SEM do to help fire up carbon capture and decarbonization in the heavy industry sectors such as cement?
Well, first, let me thank you and congratulate you, both you and GCCA, for organizing this event. I think my knee-jerk reaction to your question would be, this is exactly what it's all about. So to give a bit more details on the SEM, we're a platform that were created by governments to be an accelerator of these type of collaboration mechanisms. The SEM is not a treaty-based organization. Our members are not signatories to any agreement. They're part of the SEM because they see value and they want to be at the forefront. And so we're talking about turbocharging. That's exactly what the SEM is about, is bringing those partners that have a vested interest and the capacity to really move the agenda forward, and then taking the results of that kind of forefront runner and then bring it to the masses and get a global aspect. And the key aspect of this is about creating the right collaboration framework. So we of course focus a lot on international government-to-government collaboration to make sure that the capacity that is built, the lessons learned in those governments that have been the first at the creating pathways to decarbonization actually can share their knowledge with others. But we also even work on intra-governmental collaboration. So being able to get energy ministers, industry ministers, transport ministers, finance ministers, climate change ministers to talk to one another and say, hey, what you're trying to solve, I'm actually working for a different policy reason, and making them work together. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly, also getting a private sector to government dialogue going. So a discussion like today, being able to get government representatives with industry to discuss what are the issues and who's got the right levers to address those issues is really at the bottom of what we do. And we do that on two kind of frameworks. We have what we call work streams, who basically bring the expert, bring the knowledge together throughout the year, advancing the state of knowledge, sharing practices, and even demonstrating where we can go. And we've got, of course, the CCUS initiative is a good example, but you were talking about creating demand. Rana is actually one of the coordinator of an industrial deep decarbonization initiative, which advances a global public procurement pledge, whose main purpose is to create that demand for the low carbon aspects, recognizing that the public sector is one of the largest public works, contractor in the world. So being able to take that in a way to create demand. And so that's one of the way that we work, is each of our work streams is trying to address all the issues from power, transport, industry, even social aspects like skills. Will we have the right knowledge? You were talking about regulators who need to understand the aspects. So being able to share progress in terms of having the right skills in the workforce to advance this. And then we try to bring this knowledge at the senior-most decision-making level. So we have a dedicated yearly ministerial where we bring all our members and our partners, because we have about 55 countries who actually are participating in some of our work streams, to discuss at the seniorest level what are the key challenges that remain to be addressed, what progress have we made, but then where do we need to focus next. So it's a bit of both a dialogue between getting ministers to understand what progress has been made, but also getting their guidance in what we do. And we try to do that more than once a year. That's why we're here at the COP. That's why we've been very present at the G20, so that we use all of these opportunities to be able to make sure that when governments are setting direction, they do so understanding there is actually action going. So one of the key messages we're trying to bring to the COP is, hey, don't be afraid. Be ambitious. We have the coalitions that can actually make it work. And so I would say basically what the SEM brings to organizations like these who want to move forward is in three areas. An opportunity to meet regularly and really hash out the issues and get to share the best practices. An ability to also work across streams. So basically linking the production of technologies like CCUS, like hydrogen, like biofuels, the actual supply chain aspect, including for fuels, for example, transportation. So we have a Marines initiative that is really trying to see how are we going to get the supply to the demand, and then a demand creation arm to make sure that we basically, so in looking at all these things holistically, and then finally an opportunity to have a dialogue with the seniorest most decision makers and making sure that there is support for this. And when we're talking about a senior decision maker, it's not only ministers. We also invite C-suite executives to come to the ministerial, have roundtable discussions so that not only governments are enabled to act, but within their industry, there is a feeling that, you know what, the political will is there, so we will empower all of you to really, push the envelope in terms of sustainability aspects. So this is really what we hope to be able to bring in. Very happy to be here today.
Great, thanks JF, and thanks for that. And indeed, SEM can be a real catalyst of this three-way collaboration between governments, industries, finance, and others. So yeah, great. We only have a few minutes left. So final point, going back to the demand creation. JF mentioned that Rana, you are coordinator of IDDI, which many of us already know here. One of the points under IDDI is the Green Public Procurement Pledge. Can you say a little bit more about what that is, and maybe then our industry colleagues could comment a little bit from their perspective what kind of conversations they might be having with governments on green public procurement and demand creation.
Absolutely. And actually, also Jean-François triggered this point about skills, which I wanted to mention before. I mean, absolutely. If I need expertise on CCUS, it's so hard at the moment to source any expertise on this. So, you know, we really need to work very heavily on this skills issue, and certainly have more women. So shout out to all the women in the room as well. Now, on the demand creation, yes, under IDDI, we have the Green Public Procurement Pledge. It actually solicits government to commit to procurement of low-carbon steel, cement, and concrete for public construction projects. And essentially, it has four levels for the pledge. The very first one is for governments to start the requirement of the disclosure and the data frameworks for reporting. There's a whole issue around the standards that are being used. And so what we realized is that even that requires some hand-holding actually for governments to commit to. The second tier is for governments to commit to the procurement of low-carbon steel, cement, or concrete in construction projects, and that's based on a threshold that we sort of discussed as well with GCCA and also with Responsible Steel and World Steel. Now, governments are doing consultations around what is the threshold, because it depends on national pathways which threshold they would commit to as well. The third level is around commitments for commitments for near zero steel, cement, and concrete, so on signature projects. So this is really to cause more disruptive technologies and adoption of more disruptive technologies. And then the final tier of the pledge is alignment of procurement targets with net zero goals, because what we see is also a bit of a disconnect between what countries pledge under climate and then industrial policy, procurement policy, and so on and so forth. Okay, great. So that's the framework of the pledge. Now what we have is we have 3 governments that have committed to do the consultations, and these are the governments of Canada, UK, and Germany. And on the 5th of December, there is a session where these governments are going to update us and tell us more around what is the threshold that they're committing to. I can't disclose now because it's still in the making, but there's another 4 or 5 countries that are also committing, and major countries, I have to say, that are committing to this pledge. Also on the 5th of December, this will be announced during a roundtable that we are organizing. So we see momentum, but honestly, the bottleneck that we need to resolve to bring more countries on board is the issue related to the data protocols and also the standard. Without that, it's not going to work out. So thanks.
Thank you, Rana. We do have to wrap up in a few minutes, but if any of the industry representatives want to comment on public procurement, and maybe starting by you, Winston, who's going to buy Evo Zero?
Well, that's the question. We only launched it on Tuesday, but the books are open, so if anyone is interested. But no, I think I mean, public procurement is one of the key issues, of course, when we talk about making a business case. We will, I think, as all of us have outlined before, we will require some level of funding for the first 10, 15 years, because these are all first mover projects, right, where there doesn't exist any blueprint. And it's clear that also the green premium itself will not get us there yet. The ETS price is not, the CO2 price is not there yet. And also, of course, we do have the capital cost at the beginning, and these projects will only be operationalized in a few years, with the exception of the Breivik one. But we are looking very much into public procurement as well, and private procurement. and that is one area where we think not enough is happening. There is a few discussions ongoing, and very grateful for initiatives such as the IDDI, which are really working on this. I think from our point of view, what is very important from us is that really we are very transparent about the environmental benefits. So we need to have a very solid monitoring and verification scheme, and we need to raise awareness about the benefits, also in terms of commercialization for our customers, because they will be able to implement net zero buildings as soon as the products come to the market. And of course they can use that for their discussions with SBTi, and they can offer more expenses office and rental space. So there's also not just an environmental benefit, but there's also a commercial benefit to it. And then we also need to speak with the countries. And I must say, I mean, yeah, for 40 to 60%, I think globally of concrete is being purchased by public projects. And it's not, I think some of the governments could really be in the forefront. But we don't see that yet happening enough. I mean, in the US we have the Buy Clean program, which I think is a good example, but we don't really see that popping up anywhere else. So we would like to see some more leadership here, and having pledges, but also updating the standards and the building codes is very important in order to enable these projects to kick off.
Thank you, Winston. Anything more to add?
Yeah,
very
super
briefly?
quickly, two things. We need to continue working with the IDDI to make sure that we speak the same language, and that the governments are equipped with something that is meaningful and relevant for each and every country in the globe, because it's not one single number that will be used universally. And the second element, there are solutions available already today on the market, up to minus 60% in some cases. So this should already be in the market. And let's not make perfect the enemy of very good, because we can already advance today. We've had our brand EcoPlanet and EcoPact on the market for 2 years. They're growing, their market share is growing. Let's already make sure that governments procure that, and that we go step by step and not wait for the ultimate Evo Zero.
Right.
I would say to complement what governments can do, definitely the construction value chain is something that the GCCA and all of its members, we can work on the private side of things. We have to put together the specifiers of our products, like Hensler, and then the developers and the construction companies, and also create that private side of things to complement the good signals that could come from these countries that will take a lead on the public procurement, no? But I think the two elements have to work together if we want to scale up quickly, no? The demand for these products.
Great. On those words, we are going to finish. Thomas, do you want to say something?
Thank you very much for really an excellent discussion. I think it was more than a panel. It was really a discussion, on a working discussion on many things. I mean, I take some of your points. Our role as an association is not to connect the dots and to make sure that wherever we have a country that has a project that has low carbon, that we also connect into IDDI, and that we make sure that all these initiatives across the world, with CCUS, with UNIDO, with the Breakthrough Cement, with the Industrial Transition Accelerator, that we put that together in working package, also with the National Cement Association, on that we walk the talk locally through the roadmap exercise and make things happen locally. And I mean, really, I take a lot of good things from the discussion of today. Thank you very much again.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. And don't forget, tomorrow, same time, transport and storage infrastructure, this same space. Be back. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks everybody for staying. And nobody is to leave, I'm told. You shall stay put for some further